That morning began like any other. I woke up to sunlight streaming through the curtains, the sound of cars echoing from the street below. But there was something unusual in my chest. A sharp pain, not intense but persistent, like a small bell ringing in the silence, warning me of something I didn't understand. I rubbed my chest and took a deep breath. It's probably just from sleeping in an awkward position or working too hard, I told myself. I had been staying up late a lot lately, stressed out about a year-end project, and eating irregularly. My body had been warning me for a long time, but I always ignored it because I thought I was young, healthy, and had a lot to do. I went to work as usual. The pain didn't go away, but lingered, waiting for an opportunity to flare up. In the elevator, I felt a brief dizziness. At my desk, my hands trembled slightly as I held my coffee cup. I tried to smile, to act like everything was fine, as if it were just a lack of sleep. Until around 11 a.m., when I was presenting to my boss in the meeting room, my vision blurred, my heart raced, and the chest pain became excruciating. I dropped my pen, grabbed the chair, and collapsed, to the horror of my colleagues. Everything happened very quickly after that. People shouting, hands holding me down, then the sound of ambulance sirens in the distance. Half conscious, I could only remember the light on the ceiling, the sound of wheels rolling, and the cold creeping into every cell of my body. I was taken to the emergency room. There I lay still, hooked up to wires, feeling my heartbeat on the flickering monitor. The doctor said my heart was unstable and needed close monitoring. They ran tests, took an electrocardiogram, and x-rays, and I lay there listening to every sound as if it were coming from a distant place. In that moment, when everything faded away, I realized something. I had no control over anything. My health, my future, or even my next breath were all beyond my reach. I had always thought of myself as strong, independent, and not needing anyone's help, least of all God. I lived by reason, by schedule, and by my own plan. But now in that room filled with the smell of disinfectant and the sound of machines, I was faced with a big question. If today is my last day, what have I lived for? And what's scarier than death is that I don't have an answer. I don't remember who called the ambulance. It could have been a colleague or someone who saw me collapse without saying a word. All I know is that when I slowly opened my eyes, I was in an ambulance. Red lights flashing through the foggy windows, and the siren piercing the silence of the city. I never thought I would be in an ambulance like this. Before, I only saw this in movies or from a distance, then quickly turned away and went back to my work and busy life. But today, I was the main character in a moment where everything familiar seemed to vanish. Each beat of my heart was no longer a given. It felt like a battle, each thud struggling, like a body struggling against waves of exhaustion. I could hear the beeping of the heart monitor, feel the needle piercing my skin, and hear the calm voice of the medical staff. Stay calm, you're okay. But I don't feel okay. I feel like I'm slipping away from life, not violently, but slowly and surely. It's as if I'm being pulled out of reality and no one, not even myself, can hold me back. In that moment, deep inside me, something stirred. It wasn't panic or regret, but a whisper. I didn't know where it came from. I wasn't familiar with prayer. I had never read the Bible seriously, and I had never truly called on God with faith. Yet in that fragile moment, I heard myself whisper, God, if you are real, please don't let me die. I didn't know why I said it. It wasn't a deliberate thought. But as my lips moved, tears suddenly streamed down my face. Not because of physical pain, but because, for the first time, I felt so small. I had lived too long in the self-satisfaction. I believed in myself, in my plans, and my control. I thought I could turn any situation around, until my body betrayed me, and I lay there, helpless like a child. The car continued to speed through the streets, the sirens blaring. But inside me, it felt like another kind of silence was opening up. A vast emptiness, filled with questions. I didn't know if I was going to die, but I did know this. For the first time, I called out to a God I had never believed was real. There was no answer from above, no light shining down, but there was no absolute silence either. Something calmed within me. It was as if an invisible hand had gently placed itself on my chest, not healing me instantly, but letting me know that I was not alone. I closed my eyes. In that moment, I vowed that if I survived today, I would never live the same way again. I was pushed into the emergency room. Everything happened so fast, but inside me, time seemed to slow down. The cold white lights on the ceiling flickered past my half-open eyes. The faces of nurses and doctors bent over me, some calling my name, some monitoring machines, some searching for a vein to insert an IV. I heard a doctor mention something about the risk of a heart attack. I had never seen their faces before, but today I had to entrust my life to them. I was cold, not just because of the air conditioning in the emergency room, but because I felt vulnerable, powerless, without status, without plans. Just a human being lying between life and death. And in that moment, a question rang out in my mind, clearer than ever before. If this is the end, am I ready? I didn't know where it came from. Maybe it was my survival instinct. Maybe from childhood memories of my grandmother telling me about God. Maybe from the hurried words I had uttered in the ambulance. But this time, it wasn't a cry for help. It was a question that dug deep into the core of my soul. I thought about all the years I had lived, living for my work, for recognition, for goals that seemed so important. I used to be proud that I was a person who knew what I wanted, a person with plans, who knew how to strategize and control my emotions. But now when I can't breathe on my own, when a single second of delay could stop my heart, all of that means nothing. I've prepared for so many things in life, career, finances, the future, but I've never prepared for death. I've never seriously considered what would happen afterwards. I thought I was young, healthy, and had time. But the truth is, no one knows when their last moment will come. And I, the person who always carefully plans every meeting, every project, every contract, hadn't prepared for the biggest thing of all. What would happen to my soul? A long beep sounded from the monitor. A nurse shouted something. I saw the doctor hurriedly adjust the ventilator. They injected more medicine. My heart started beating strongly again. I didn't lose consciousness, but my mind drifted between consciousness and unconsciousness. In that limbo, I remembered a verse from the Bible that I had read somewhere. For your life is like the mist that appears for a moment and then vanishes. I am not a religious person. I don't go to church often, but at that moment I knew one thing for sure. If God was real, I wasn't ready to meet him. And that was a fear deeper than anything I had ever experienced. I whispered again, Lord, if you are really watching me, please don't let me leave this life with my heart so far from you. I didn't know how to pray properly. I had no spiritual experience. But those words came from deep within me, true, trembling, but earnest. I didn't expect a miracle. I just hoped I wouldn't die before finding my way back to my Creator. And right then, amid the sounds of machines and the rush of doctors, I felt something unusual, not physically, but spiritually. A small piece like a quiet ray of light shone into the depths of my soul. I wasn't out of the woods yet. I was still lying there, fragile. But in my heart, I knew something had begun to change. Amidst the cold lights and the steady beeping of the machines, I lay motionless, feeling each labored breath like a battle for life. The doctors were still standing by, whispering to each other, but I couldn't hear them anymore. Everything became distant. Inside me, there was only a vast emptiness, where all noise faded away, leaving only one agonizing question. If this is the end, where will I go? I had no answer. I never thought I needed faith. I was a practical person, living by reason and science. But in that moment, when there was nothing left to hold on to, I was surprised to hear the words escape my lips. God, if you are real, please don't let me die without knowing who you are. I don't know why I said that. I didn't know how to pray. I had never read a single chapter of the Bible. But in that moment between life and death, my soul, the deepest part of me, found its way to the one I had forgotten all my life. And that was the first prayer of my life. It wasn't polished, it wasn't memorized, it wasn't ritualistic. It was just a whisper, trembling, but sincere. I didn't expect a voice from heaven. I didn't expect an angel to appear, nor did I dare to hope for a miracle. I only knew that if God was real, he would hear my words. Strangely, after that prayer, I didn't feel any miracle happen immediately. The machines continued to hum steadily. People were still rushing around to keep me alive. But inside me, something very small, like a ray of light, had just begun to shine. I began to remember images from my childhood. The days when my grandmother took me to church, the songs about Jesus that I thought were fairy tales, the times I secretly watched her read the Bible by the window when everyone else was asleep. At that time, I smiled to myself, thinking that she lived in a strange world. But now, lying here, surrounded by breathing tubes, in a battle between life and death, I longed to enter that world. The world my grandmother believed in, the world she hoped for, the world with God. I breathe heavily. Each breath is an effort, but my heart feels a little lighter. I don't know why. Is it because I said what I never dared to admit? That I was afraid? That I couldn't control my own life? That I needed someone greater than anything I had ever held in my hands? A young nurse approached, smiled gently, and squeezed my hand. "You're recovering well," she said. "Keep up the good spirit." I nodded. But she didn't know that what was keeping me going, not the machines, not the medicine, was a small prayer. I couldn't explain it, but I knew I had just begun a journey. A journey not to escape death, but to find true life. Not the life of the body, but the life of the soul of the spirit with God. The next morning, when I woke up in the intensive care unit, I saw the worry on the doctor's face. A group of doctors entered together, holding test results, ultrasound images, and vital signs. But what caught my attention wasn't the paperwork. It was the puzzled looks on their faces. "We still haven't determined the exact cause," one doctor said cautiously. "Your vital signs dropped suddenly, but there are no signs of blockage, no infection, no heart problems. To be honest, your test results are almost normal." I looked at him, feeling disoriented. If everything was normal, then why did I feel like I just returned from the brink of death? The doctor continued, "We'll monitor you further. It could be a temporary reaction of the autonomic nervous system or an undiscovered factor." I nodded, but my mind was unsettled. I'm not a superstitious person, but this time I knew something beyond the machines was happening inside me. That night, I lay still in the stark white room. The lights were dimmer, no ambulance sirens, no hurried footsteps. Only the steady beep of the heart monitor. I began to recall the prayer I had said in the emergency room. For the first time in my life, I didn't resort to logic or knowledge. I simply uttered a plea, like a child. And I prayed again, not because someone told me to, not because I hoped God would cure me, but because I knew I needed to be close to him. I whispered, "Lord, I don't understand what's happening, but if it's you who is at work, I will continue to trust. Even if the doctors can't explain it, I know you are doing something inside me." Right after I said that, a strange sense of peace washed over me. It wasn't an overwhelming emotion like in the movies. No, it was a deep stillness, as if I were lying in the palm of someone greater than all the doctors and treatment plans. The next day, the head doctor came by. He looked at me with a strange expression. "Do you know," he said, "we were prepared for the worst, but now your vitals are stabilizing on their own. We're not sure why, but it's clear you're pulling through." I smiled weakly, though I was still weak, and in my heart, there was only one thought: I thank him. I didn't dare declare myself healed. I didn't shout about miracles, but I knew what was happening inside me didn't come from this world. It wasn't random. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't luck. It was a divine intervention, an answer to the first prayer of my life, and that was only the beginning. After a few days in the hospital, when the pain had subsided, but my spirit was still confused, I began to pay more attention to those around me. The doctors still hadn't found the cause of the strange incident that had happened to me, and I continued to pray, silently, quietly, not knowing who God was, but knowing for sure that he was near. That morning, as the sunlight streamed through the small window in my hospital room, a nurse I had never seen before walked in. She was not like the nurses who usually cared for me. She was not wearing the usual green or white uniform, but a light-colored coat, and her face was very gentle. She did not say much. She just smiled, placed her hand on the table next to my bed kindly, and handed me a small piece of paper folded in half. I opened it in surprise. Written in soft handwriting were the words, "I will never leave you, nor forsake you." Hebrews 13:5. I looked at her, about to ask why she had given me this Bible verse, but she just smiled, nodded gently, and quietly left the room. I held the paper in my hand, my heart filled with an indescribable emotion. There was something very personal and intimate in those words. I read them again. "I will never leave you nor forsake you." How did she know I needed to hear that? Why, at the moment when I felt most alone, in a strange place with no one I knew, did someone come and leave a message from the one I was searching for? I placed the paper on my chest. Silence. The Bible verse was like a ray of light shining into the deepest part of my heart, where I usually hid my fears, my insecurities, and the questions no one could answer. I remembered my first prayer in the emergency room. "God, if you are real." Now it seemed as if he was gently responding, "I am here. I have never left you." From that moment on, I no longer saw myself as just a patient waiting for a diagnosis. I felt like I was on a journey, not just to be healed physically, but to be found by love. I carefully folded the paper and tucked it into my wallet like a treasure. And I thought to myself, if God could use an anonymous nurse in a short Bible verse to touch a lost heart like mine, he could do anything. That day, I didn't see any dazzling miracles. There were no angels, no blinding light, just a small piece of paper and a big promise, a promise that would never be taken back. My body was still not well. My vital signs fluctuated, sometimes stable, sometimes plummeting unexpectedly. The doctors still couldn't pinpoint the exact cause of the intense pain I had experienced. They ordered more tests, monitored me closely, but all they could say was, "We're monitoring and trying to understand what's happening." If this were me a few days ago, I would have been panicking over such vague answers. I am a rational person who always needs a reason, a clear explanation, and above all, control. But now, strangely enough, I no longer feel afraid. Though my body is still tired, sometimes exhausted, my mind feels lighter. I don't know when the change came, only that after receiving the Bible verse from the stranger, a quiet peace spread through me like warmth in the winter. I opened my phone and typed in Hebrews 13:5, and I read the passage in the Bible, "I will never leave you nor forsake you. Be content with what you have, for he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you." I read it over and over, like a child hearing his father's voice lulling him to sleep for the first time. Something melted inside me, a gentle, light feeling that was not easily forgotten. Before I prayed out of fear because I had nowhere else to turn. But now my prayers are no longer filled with panic. They are like whispers between two loved ones. They don't need many words, but they are full of sincerity. I began to whisper to God in my heart, not begging for rescue, but truly conversing. "God, I still don't know who you are, but I feel you are near. If it is really you, then thank you. I've never felt this way before." No one taught me how to talk to him. No one told me what to say, but the words just flowed naturally, as if I had known him for a long time, only now daring to speak. That peace did not come because my circumstances were better. No one assured me that the pain would not return, but I knew that in my weakness, there was another power lifting me up. I began to remember other times in my life when I had overcome difficulties without understanding why I had survived. Perhaps he had always been there silently, gently, waiting for the day I would turn back and look at him. And perhaps it was this physical weakness that God used to slow me down, so that I would no longer run after what I thought was safe, but learn to trust in the one I cannot see, but feel. That day I wrote in my phone diary, "My body still hurts, but in my heart, I no longer fear death, because there is one thing I am beginning to believe. I am not alone, and life is not in the hands of doctors, but in the hands of the Creator." That night I couldn't sleep, not because of the pain, but because my heart was filled with thoughts. The white light in the hospital room shone down on the ceiling, creating flickering patches of light and shadow. I lay still, listening to the steady beep of the heart monitor, the footsteps of nurses walking down the hallway, and myself. I began to recall the days that had passed, not like a touching movie, but like intertwined fragments of memory. There were images I had wanted to forget, yet they now returned with clarity. I saw myself in my youth, confident, full of ambition, always thinking I had everything under control. I saw the mistakes I made, the times I hurt others to protect myself. I saw the important relationships I let slip away because I was too busy to care. And above all, I saw something I had always avoided: loneliness. That feeling isn't always clear. Sometimes it hides behind social gatherings, polite smiles, and fleeting successes. But tonight, surrounded by 4 white walls and the lifeless hum of machines, I have nowhere to hide. I whispered, "God, if you are listening, could it be that you still want me, even though I am like this?" I used to think I didn't need anyone, but in that moment, I wanted someone who knew me deeply and wouldn't turn away. I didn't see any bright visions. No angels appeared, but something happened. A warm feeling filled the room. It wasn't from the air conditioner. It wasn't from the medication. It was like an invisible hug, gentle but so real that it made me cry. I started to cry, not because I was afraid, but because I was touched. For the first time in years, I felt small, and it wasn't shameful. I said once more, without any clear reason, "If you are real, please don't abandon me." And at that moment, I heard within myself, not with my ears, something soft yet clear. "I have always been here." I held my breath. I didn't know if it was an illusion, my imagination, or him. But one thing was certain, I was no longer alone. In the middle of the night, I found light. Not the light outside, but the light within me. It didn't dispel all my problems, but it was enough for me to know that I was seen, known, and loved. That night I didn't sleep, but I rested for the first time in my soul. The next morning, when the first rays of sunlight shone through the hospital window, I was still silent after a night of almost no sleep. My eyes were swollen, but my heart was lighter. Although my body was tired, I felt like I was entering a different world, a world where all old values had been turned upside down. The nurse had just finished taking my blood pressure when a middle-aged man in a simple shirt and a kind smile walked in. He was holding a thick book with a worn leather cover, the Bible. He introduced himself gently. "Hello, my name is Pastor Tuan. A friend of yours asked me to visit you. Would it be okay if I stayed for a few minutes?" I was a little surprised, but nodded. I wasn't close enough to anyone to ask a pastor to come, but I guessed that a colleague had heard the news and wanted to help. He didn't rush to ask the usual questions. He just sat there, with a patient look on his face. The way he was there made me open up. I started talking, not in any particular order, not knowing why I was talking, but just pouring it out. The pain, the fear, last night's dream, the feeling that someone was with me in the darkness. I said things I had never told anyone before. The emptiness I had carried with me for years. The success in my life that couldn't heal the loneliness inside. He listened silently. He didn't interrupt. He didn't judge. Then he smiled and said something I will always remember. "Maybe this happened so that you would know that God loves you so much that he didn't want you to continue living without knowing who he is." I was silent. He continued, "God doesn't cause pain, but he can use it to awaken a sleeping heart. You thought you were falling, but you were actually being lifted up by a love you had never known before." I looked up at him and began to cry. He opened the Bible and read softly, "I have loved you with an everlasting love. Therefore I have continued my faithfulness to you." Jeremiah 31 wrote. At that moment, I didn't fully understand the meaning, but it touched me deeply. Not because of the beautiful words, but because it spoke to my heart, as if someone had written it just for me. We prayed together, not loudly, not dramatically. He just put his hand on my shoulder and whispered, "Lord, please let your son know that you are waiting, not to punish him, but to embrace him." It was the first time I had ever heard anyone call me God's son. The first time I had ever heard that God was not just some distant being in the sky, but a father searching for his lost child. I didn't know what the future held or if my condition would improve, but I knew one thing for sure. God had started something in me. It was no longer just religion. It was no longer blind faith. It was a relationship, starting in a cold, white hospital room, amid the beeping of machines, and a stranger with a kind gaze. I no longer felt nameless. I began to believe that I was being called by name. On the third morning in the hospital, I opened my eyes and no longer felt heavy, not completely healthy, but a feeling of lightness. Lightness in my chest, lightness in my head, lightness in my soul. I took a breath, deeper than any I had taken before. My chest no longer felt like it was being cut by a knife. I sat up slowly without dizziness or lightheadedness like before. The nurse came in as usual to check my vitals. I saw her furrow her brow, then shake her head in disbelief. She turned to me half surprised, half delighted. "Your vitals are starting to stabilize. Blood pressure, heart rate, oxygen levels, all back to safe levels. We don't know what's happening, but it's definitely a positive development." I smiled, saying nothing. The doctors arrived shortly after, conducting further checks. Still no clear explanation. They only knew that a dangerous and puzzling condition was naturally subsiding. No new medication, no special interventions, no decisive treatment plan. But the situation was changing. A young, straightforward doctor sighed and said, "We really don't know what happened. You could call it a natural recovery, but it could also be something that medicine cannot explain." I didn't respond. I just looked out the window, where the sunlight was shining down on the small table. And in my heart, I heard a gentle voice say, "You called on me, and I listened." There was no thunder. There was no blinding light. No one rushed to film or call the press to report a miracle. Everything was too quiet. But I knew a miracle had truly happened. It wasn't something loud or dramatic. It wasn't a dramatic turn of events that would astonish the world, but it was a quiet miracle, coming just when my heart was soft, when I had just prayed with all my heart. I don't know how he touched me. I can't define it. I can't make anyone believe it with me. But I know one thing for sure. I am not the same person I was before, not just in my body, but in my soul. The greatest miracle is not that I survived. It's that I began to realize God is alive and he sees me. He loves me. That day, I didn't need anyone to confirm it. I didn't need proof. I didn't need theological arguments or doctrines. I just knew. I had prayed and I had been heard. It was a miracle, silent but clear, indisputable. And I whispered to myself through my tears, "Thank you for not leaving me." In the days that followed, I was taken out of the emergency room and transferred to a recovery room. The doctor said my condition was stable and I could be discharged soon. My family was overjoyed. My friends breathed a sigh of relief. Everyone saw it as luck, a second chance at life. But in my heart, I knew. It wasn't just a chance to live. It was a call to change. I looked at myself. The man who lay helpless in the emergency room that day, fearful, empty, and never having truly known God, was now being awakened from within by him. I no longer saw life as I had before, just work, success, and temporary goals. Something in me had changed. It was subtle but profound. It was as if I had not merely escaped death, but had been resurrected, living with a completely new awareness. I no longer knew God as a vague concept or someone mentioned in rituals. I longed to know who he was, to know him truly. I began by borrowing a small Bible from the hospital, from the same pastor who had come to visit me. For the first time in my life, I opened that book not out of curiosity or religious obligation, but out of a deep longing in my heart. I began to read, starting with the Gospels, about a man named Jesus, about sinners who were forgiven, the sick were healed, and lost souls were called by name and returned. Each line spoke directly to my heart. I have come to seek and to save the lost. Whoever seeks me will find me. You did not choose me, but I chose you. I realized that what I had just experienced was not a coincidence. It was not random. It was a miracle, not just to save a life, but to awaken a soul. I began to pray. No longer were they desperate pleas like those in the emergency room. They were sincere whispers. Lord, I don't want to just live. I want to live in you. I want to change. Please teach me. And strangely, I began to feel my heart being cleansed bit by bit. The wounds of the past that I had buried began to surface, but they were no longer there to torment me. They were there to be healed. I remembered the years I had lived as if I were the center of the universe, chasing after what I thought was success, neglecting my relationships, neglecting my inner life. I used to think I was strong, but in reality, I was just avoiding the deep emptiness inside me. Now through the pain, I see myself clearly, weak, fragile, and in need of love. And I believe that the one who saved me doesn't just want me to be healthy, but wants me to be completely transformed. I am no longer afraid of the past. I am also not afraid of the future. I just see myself as a child, discovering for the first time that I have a father, and that father is not far away. He is holding my hand every day. I am still in the hospital, but in my heart, I know that a new journey has begun. And this time, I am not just living for myself. I am living to know God, to follow God, and to belong to God. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, the sky seemed bluer, not because the weather was nice, but because I was seeing everything with new eyes. I returned home, but I was no longer the same person. Before I had walked through this doorway in a hurry, always worrying about work, goals, and pressure, this time I stood at my doorstep like a person reborn. My loved ones welcomed me with joy. They thought I had just escaped a life-threatening situation. But how could I explain to them that I had not only been physically revived, but also spiritually revived? I began to feel like a new journey was beginning. It was no longer a journey to find my place in society. It was a journey to find God. During my first days at home, when my body was still weak, I spent a lot of time in silence. I picked up the Bible that the pastor had left behind and continued reading. This time I didn't just read, I listened. Every word, every sentence was like a light shining into the darkest corners of my heart. There were passages that made me stop and cry, not because I was sad, but because someone understood me completely. I have loved you with an everlasting love. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not overwhelm you. Whoever belongs to me will listen to my voice. I began to pray, no longer out of fear, but as a conversation with a father I had just come to know. I didn't use fancy words, just sincere words. Lord, I don't know where to start, but I want to live according to you. Please teach me step by step. Gradually, I felt my mind being renewed. I no longer looked at my family with the same critical eyes as before. I began to apologize and mend relationships within my family. I called a friend whom I had hurt just to say, I've changed thanks to God, and I want to apologize. No one told me to do this, but I knew that the one working in me was the Holy Spirit. I also began attending a small church near my home. At first, I just sat quietly, not wanting anyone to know who I was. But an older man came up to me, shook my hand and said, I see God doing something very special in you. I was moved to tears. I found a community of faith, a place where I didn't have to prove anything, where I didn't have to be smart or strong. I just had to be myself and be willing to let God lead me. One night, I stood singing during worship, a song about salvation. I couldn't hold back my tears. No one forced me to feel emotional. But as I remembered the emergency room, remembered the moment I whispered my first prayer, I knew I had been found. I no longer lived to fear death. I lived to know God more each day. And I believe the greatest miracle is not that I survived. It's that God entered my life and stayed. Though there is still much to learn and many challenges ahead, I am no longer alone. I have God. I have brothers and sisters in faith. I have a new heart. And above all, I have real hope. After recovering and starting to walk with God, one thing changed in me. I no longer wanted to live just for myself. Before, my life revolved around myself, my work, my achievements, other people's opinions of me. I tried to build a perfect, successful, confident image, but inside I was empty. It was only when I was lying in the hospital bed between life and death that I saw how empty I really was. Now, I no longer want to waste my breath on meaningless things. I began sharing my miracle story, not for praise, but so others could know about the one who saved me. I recounted the dream I had in the emergency room, the times I whispered prayers in panic, and the strange peace I felt before any medical results changed. When I spoke, some were moved, some remained silent, some laughed. It must be the doctor's skill, not God. I didn't blame them, because I once thought the same way. I once doubted, once closed my heart to all things sacred. But what I couldn't deny was that I had changed at my core, and that couldn't come from medicine or psychology alone. I started attending a small church group, then signed up for a hospital visitation program. At first, I felt I had nothing to offer, just someone who had been sick. But it was during those visits to the hospital, standing by someone's bedside, that I realized this is where I was saved, and this is where I can be a witness to a miracle. I told them, those who were desperate, that I had once been there thinking I was going to die. But God touched me, not with human hands, but with a presence that cannot be described in words. Once, a cancer patient quietly held my hand after I shared my story. He said, "I no longer hope to live long, but because of you, I want to live right, even if I only have a few days left." I cried, not out of simple emotion, but because I saw clearly the purpose of my life, not to stand out, not to be safe, but to tell about God. I began to write down my journey, not because I wanted to become famous or write a book, but because I knew that somewhere out there, there would be people like me before, confused, afraid, lonely, but not yet knowing that God is always near. I began to serve more, starting with the smallest things: cleaning chairs, driving elderly people to church, visiting the sick. Before, I would have considered these tasks trivial. Now I see them as an honor, because I am using my breath to give back to the one who saved me. One night, after returning from a prayer meeting, I sat quietly in my room and cried. Not because I was sad, but because my heart was overflowing with gratitude. I thought of the time I lay cold in the emergency room and whispered for the first time, "Lord, if you are real." Now I no longer say if. I know he is real, and he is still calling many people, just as he called me. I no longer live to pursue my own dreams. I live so that others may know eternal life, because this life is no longer mine. It belongs to the one who redeemed me, with a silent miracle and with a love that never fails. My health has improved, but I am not completely healed. Some mornings I wake up still feeling tired. At times the old pain returns, lingering and persistent. In the past I would have panicked, but now I am no longer afraid. I have learned to live each day, not with anxiety about what will happen, but with the confidence that God is with me, no matter what tomorrow brings. I recall the moments in the emergency room when life hung by a thread. At that moment, I faced what people fear most: death. But strangely, it was then that I felt something I had never truly known before: the presence of God. He didn't promise that I wouldn't feel pain, but he promised that I would never be alone. I began to change my perspective on life. Before, I lived as if I controlled everything: my future, my career, my health. But in reality, everything was fragile. A sudden pain, an unexpected diagnosis, and all my plans crumbled. Now I live each day as a gift, not to enjoy selfishly, but to give back. For we know whom we have believed. That verse from the Bible is no longer just theory to me. I know God is faithful because I have seen him act. I have heard his voice not with my ears, but through the peace in the midst of what should have been the most hopeless place. When someone asks me, "Are you sure you won't relapse?" I smile and reply, "I'm not sure, but I'm sure he won't abandon me." I used to fear the future. I feared not having enough money for treatment. I feared living alone. I feared death. But all those fears have been pushed away by God's love. I no longer need clear answers for tomorrow, because I have God for today. I learned to say yes every morning. When I wake up, I place my hand on my chest where the pain was once unbearable. and thank God that my heart is still beating. I pray, Lord, today may not be easy, but I know you are ahead of me. Teach me to follow without trembling or doubting. I don't live as if I'm immune to hardship. I still get tired and worried at times, but I have a solid foundation, my faith in the one who didn't abandon me in my most fragile moments. What else is there to fear? If tomorrow is a difficult day, God will be my strength. If tomorrow is a beautiful day, God will be my joy. If tomorrow is my last day, I will go home where He is waiting. I used to live as if everything had to be my way. Now I live in trust that God knows what is best, even when I don't understand. I no longer ask, why did that happen? I simply ask, Lord, what are you teaching me through this? Tomorrow may bring pain, but I am not afraid, because in the emergency room, He was there, and I am certain, in every room of my life from now on, He will always be there. I used to live as if everything had to be my way. Now I live in trust that God knows what is best, even when I don't understand. I no longer ask, why did that happen? I simply ask, Lord, what are you teaching me through this? I no longer ask, why did that happen? I simply ask, Lord, what are you teaching me through this? Tomorrow may bring pain, but I am not afraid, because in the emergency room, He was there, and I am certain in every room of my life from now on, He will always be there. I used to think the emergency room was where life ended, where people went when all hope was lost, when medicine was powerless, and when the body could no longer endure. In my mind, it was a room of separation, of tears of despair, of an unexpected end to a journey of life. But now I know something else. The emergency room is where I truly began to live. Not a life measured by heartbeats and breaths, not a life filled with plans but empty in the soul, but a life in grace, in the presence of a God I never knew I needed so much, the Lord. As I lay on the hospital bed, surrounded by bright lights and chaotic sounds, I didn't think I was meeting God. I only knew I was afraid. I was weak, small, and completely helpless. But God was there, not when I was strong, but when I was weak. I didn't encounter Him through thunder or lightning. I didn't see angels appear. But I saw God in a tiny verse of scripture on a nurse's note. I heard His voice in the strange peace that followed the chaos. I felt His presence through a weak but sincere prayer. Lord, if you are real, please don't let me die without knowing who you are. I didn't deserve it. I had lived far from Him. I had thought my life was in my own hands, but God didn't wait for me to fix everything before He came. He came when I was broken. He called my name in the darkness, and I heard Him. After my hospital stay, many people asked me, "Did you see a miracle?" And I replied, "I am the miracle. Not because I am alive, but because I have been transformed." I left the hospital not only with a healing body, but with a heart that had been awakened. I began to live with purpose. No longer a weary existence, but a life guided by God. I went to church, studied the Bible, and listened to others who had experienced miracles like mine. And then I began to share my story, not for admiration, but so that those in the emergency rooms of their lives would know that God is waiting right there. He doesn't call our names just once, but many times. Not when we are ready, but when we have nothing left. Now I no longer live for myself. I live to testify. Every breath is an opportunity to say, He saved me. He is still saving others, and He is never too late. The emergency room, once a place that terrified me, is now a symbol of a sacred beginning. I will never forget the moment I thought I was dying. But it turned out God was beginning something new. I am alive, not because I deserve it. I am alive because He chose to call my name in the darkest place. I walked into the emergency room confused, afraid, and feeling abandoned by the world. But what seemed like the end became the beginning of my journey of faith. God did not appear to me in a blinding light, nor did I hear a loud voice from above. But He was present in the little things: a short Bible verse, a nurse's gentle smile, a quiet peace amid the pain. I realized that miracles don't have to be supernatural or extraordinary. Sometimes a miracle is simply a heart that is moved, a heart that repents, a person who begins to live in a completely new way. I was once an unbeliever, living far from God, trusting only in myself. But in the moment when I thought it was over, God touched me and saved me. If you are in your own emergency room, whether it's an illness, a crisis, a broken heart, or a dark night of faith, you are not alone. God is there. He sees you, He knows you, and He is calling your name. Don't wait until everything is okay to seek Him. Call out to Him in the midst of your pain, in the midst of your fear, because He is the one who draws near when we are weakest. I am not special, but I was saved by God. And if He did that for me, He can do it for you too. Have you ever experienced a miracle like that? Share your story in the comments because your testimony might just touch a soul in despair. Don't forget to like this story if it touched you. Subscribe to the Living Testimonies channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on new faith journeys, where light always finds its way in the darkness. If you need someone to pray with you, leave a message. We want to stand with you in faith.